Story 1. The Mile That Never Ends. Marcus Chen had been driving the I-80 corridor for 17 years, hauling freight between Omaha and Sacramento. He knew every rest stop, every way station, every treacherous mountain pass by heart. The route was muscle memory, the kind of familiarity that let his mind wander, while his hands guided 40 tons of steel through the darkness. On the night of October 12, 2019, that familiarity became a prison. He'd left the Flying J in Rawlins, Wyoming at 11:47 p.m., his logbook meticulously updated, his reefer unit humming with a load of frozen goods bound for Reno. The night was clear, temperature hovering around 38 degrees, and traffic was sparse. Perfect conditions. Marcus settled into his seat, adjusted his CB radio to channel 19, and accelerated onto the interstate. The stretch between Rawlins and Rock Springs was desolate even by Wyoming standards. 80 miles of high desert plateau, where the darkness pressed against your windshield like black velvet, and the only lights came from your own dashboard and the occasional ranch miles off the highway. Marcus had driven it hundreds of times. Tonight, it felt different. At mile marker 187, he noticed the deer. It stood on the shoulder, a mule deer buck with a decent rack, frozen in his headlights. Marcus eased off the accelerator, waiting for it to bolt. But the deer just stood there, perfectly still, watching him pass. Something about its eyes bothered him, though he couldn't say what. He checked his mirrors. The deer hadn't moved. 5 minutes later, he passed mile marker 187 again. The same deer stood in the exact same position. Marcus blinked hard, rubbed his eyes. He'd been driving for 9 hours with one break. Maybe he was more tired than he thought. He checked his GPS. It showed him on I-80, between markers 187 and 188, heading west. Nothing unusual. The clock read 12:03 a.m. He took a pull from his thermos of coffee and focused on the white lines streaming beneath his wheels. But when the mile marker appeared in his headlights again, 187 in reflective white numbers, his stomach dropped. The deer stood there. Same position, same unnatural stillness. This time, Marcus grabbed his CB mic. "Breaker 19, this is Big Blue westbound at mile marker 187. Anybody out there got their ears on?" Static answered him. He tried again. Nothing but the hiss of empty channels. He checked his phone. No signal. Not unusual out here, but the timing made his skin prickle. His GPS still showed him moving west, the little blue arrow advancing steadily along the highway. But when he looked up at the next mile marker, the numbers read 187. Marcus pressed the accelerator harder. His speedometer climbed to 70, then 75. The engine roared, the trailer swayed slightly, and the landscape blurred past his windows. Empty darkness, the occasional sagebrush illuminated by his headlights, the white lines eating away beneath his wheels. He drove, for what felt like 10 minutes, maintaining that dangerous speed. Mile marker 187. The deer. This time, he slammed on the brakes. The truck shuddered, the trailer fishtailed slightly, and his load shifted with a heavy thump that he felt through the seat. The rig came to a stop 50 yards past the marker. Marcus sat there, engine idling, hands trembling on the wheel. His breath came fast and shallow. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't possible. He put the truck in park, engaged the brake, and climbed down from the cab. The air was cold and absolutely still. No wind, no sound except the diesel engine and the hum of his reefer unit. The stars overhead looked wrong somehow, too bright and arranged in patterns he didn't recognize. He walked back to mile marker 187, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The deer stood 15 feet away, on the shoulder. Up close, Marcus could see that it wasn't breathing. Its chest didn't rise or fall. Its eyes didn't blink. It looked like a taxidermy mount, except it was standing freely, perfectly balanced, as if suspended in time. He approached slowly, 5 feet away, 3 feet. The deer didn't react. Marcus reached out with one hand, his flashlight in the other, and touched its flank. The fur felt real, coarse and thick, but there was no warmth, no life. It was like touching a statue made of flesh. He backed away quickly, returned to his truck, and climbed into the cab. His hands shook as he shifted into gear. He'd drive backward if he had to, anything to break this loop. But when he put the transmission in reverse and checked his mirrors, the highway behind him stretched into darkness, without any mile markers visible. Forward was the only option. Marcus drove. He tried different speeds, 60 miles per hour, 80, 45. He tried driving on the shoulder, straddling the center line, moving from lane to lane. Nothing changed. Every time, mile marker 187 appeared in his headlights with mechanical regularity, and the deer stood watching him pass. His clock was stuck at 12:03 a.m. The GPS still showed movement, but the mile marker coordinates never changed. He tried the CB every few minutes, cycling through channels, calling out his position, begging for someone to respond. Only static answered. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Marcus couldn't trust his perception anymore. He was trapped in a single mile of highway, repeating endlessly, with no exit and no explanation. The monotony was maddening. Same deer, same marker, same stretch of darkness. Over and over and over. He started noticing details he'd missed before. The way one particular sagebrush on the north side of the highway had a broken branch. A crack in the asphalt near the shoulder, shaped like a lightning bolt. These landmarks confirmed what his mind was screaming. He was seeing the exact same geography, not similar stretches of identical highway. This specific mile, frozen in repetition. Around what he guessed was the 100th loop, something changed. As he passed the deer, it turned its head to follow his truck. The movement was slow, mechanical, like the gears of a clock. Its eyes tracked him, and in them Marcus saw something that made his blood turn to ice. Intelligence, awareness, and something else. Hunger. The next loop, the deer was 10 feet closer to the road. The loop after that, it stood on the white line. Marcus gripped the wheel, sweat running down his face despite the cold air from his vents. He didn't want to know what would happen if the deer reached the center of his lane. On the next pass, the deer stood directly in front of him. Marcus had no time to brake. The impact should have destroyed the animal, sent it flying, damaged his truck. Instead, his rig passed through the deer like it was smoke. For a split second, Marcus felt something in the cab with him. A presence, ancient and patient and utterly alien. Then it was gone, and the deer stood on the shoulder again, reset to its original position. But now there was something else. A sound, barely audible over the engine. A rhythmic thumping from the trailer, like something striking the inside walls. His cargo was frozen goods, pallets of boxed meats. There shouldn't be any movement back there. The thumping grew louder with each loop. Marcus tried to ignore it, but the sound burrowed into his skull. Thump, thump, thump. Regular as a heartbeat, coming from his sealed trailer. He checked the reefer unit display. Temperature holding steady at -10 degrees. Everything normal, except for the sound that shouldn't exist. He realized he was crying, though he couldn't remember when the tears had started. 17 years on the road, and he'd never felt fear like this. Not during blizzards or ice storms, not during the time his brakes failed on Donner Pass. not during close calls with drunk drivers. This was different. This was wrongness made manifest, a violation of reality's basic rules. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. Marcus passed mile marker 187, and the next marker read 188. The deer was gone. His clock jumped forward, reading 4:47 a.m. Nearly 5 hours had passed. His CB crackled to life with chatter from other drivers. His phone showed 2 bars of signal. He pulled over at the next rest area, his whole body shaking. Other trucks sat in the parking lot, their running lights glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. Normal. Real. Marcus climbed out and walked around his trailer, checking the locks. Secure. He pressed his ear against the refrigerated wall. Silence. No thumping. Just the hum of the cooling unit. He checked into Rock Springs on time, delivered his load to Reno without incident, and completed the return trip without anything unusual happening. But Marcus never drove at night again. He modified his schedule, took a pay cut for day routes, and told his dispatcher he had developed a medical condition that made night driving dangerous. That was partially true, because sometimes, in the darkness of his bedroom, Marcus hears it. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of something that traveled with him through that impossible mile. Something that marked him during those loops. And on clear nights, when he closes his eyes, he sees the deer, standing, watching, waiting for him to return to mile marker 187. Story 2. The Passenger Manifest. Daniel Reeves had hauled everything from auto parts to construction equipment during his 12 years with Midwest Freight Lines, but the pharmaceutical run from Chicago to Nashville was his bread and butter. Good pay, regular schedule, and the cargo was light enough that his fuel economy stayed decent. On March 3, 2021, he picked up a special consignment, a rush delivery for a research hospital. The paperwork listed the cargo as biological samples, packed in temperature-controlled cases, required delivery within 24 hours. The load was waiting at a facility in suburban Chicago that Daniel had never serviced before. The building was unmarked except for a street number, surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. Security was tight. 3 separate checkpoints, ID verification, retinal scan, the whole 9 yards. The cargo itself was modest, 6 aluminum cases each the size of a large suitcase, loaded onto a single pallet and secured in his climate-controlled trailer. What bothered Daniel was the paperwork. Along with the standard bill of lading, he received a passenger manifest. 6 names, listed with identification numbers and timestamps. He flagged it to the loading supervisor, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, who barely looked at him. "Wrong form," Daniel said, holding it up. "This is for passenger transport. I'm hauling cargo." The supervisor's expression didn't change. "Those are your shipping instructions. Proceed as directed." Daniel had learned not to argue with clients who paid premium rates for rush delivery. Weird paperwork was their problem, not his. He signed the forms, secured the load, and headed south on I-57 as the sun set behind him. The first hour was routine. Light traffic, clear weather, cruise control set at 67 miles per hour. He munched on beef jerky and listened to a true crime podcast, letting the miles roll past. Around 8:30 p.m., somewhere south of Champaign, his trailer started making a noise. It wasn't mechanical. Daniel knew every sound his rig made, could diagnose problems by the pitch of a rattle or the frequency of a squeak. This was different. It sounded like movement, shifting weight. But his cargo was secured, 6 cases on a single pallet, strapped down with regulations-compliant tie-downs he'd checked twice. He pulled onto the shoulder, grabbed his flashlight, and walked back to inspect the trailer. The doors were sealed with a numbered lock that matched his paperwork. Through the small ventilation slots near the top, He could hear the hum of the climate control unit. Nothing else. He circled the trailer twice, checking the undercarriage, the wheel wells, the landing gear. Everything was solid. Back in the cab, Daniel updated his logbook and merged into traffic. Maybe he'd imagined it. 15 minutes later, he heard it again. Not just movement now, but something else. A sound that made his skin crawl. Breathing. Slow, labored breathing, coming through the small communication vent that connected the cab to the trailer. Daniel reached up and slid the vent closed. The breathing stopped. His hands were sweating despite the cool air from his vents. Cargo doesn't breathe. Aluminum cases full of biological samples don't breathe. But he'd heard it, clear as day. He tried the CB, more for the comfort of human voices than anything else. The chatter was normal. Drivers discussing traffic, weather, truck stop locations. Daniel keyed the mic. "Anybody hauling medical freight tonight? This is Midnight Express, southbound on 57. A voice responded immediately. "What kind of medical freight, driver?" "Biological samples. Temperature controlled. You ever have them make noise?" Long pause. Then, "Negative, driver. Might want to pull over and check your load." But Daniel had already checked, and the doors were sealed with a numbered lock that he couldn't open without voiding his contract and losing his premium pay. He was locked into this run, literally, until he reached Nashville. At 9:15 p.m., the temperature gauge for his trailer spiked. The display showed 68 degrees, way above the required 35. Daniel's stomach dropped. If the cargo spoiled, he'd be liable. He pulled over again, killed the engine, and ran back to check the refrigeration unit. It was running properly, pumping out cold air, the compressor cycling normally. But the internal temperature gauge still read 68 degrees. He called dispatch on his satellite phone. After explaining the situation, the dispatcher put him on hold for 7 minutes. When she came back, her voice was tight. "Continue to Nashville. Do not stop except for fuel. Do not open the trailer under any circumstances. Confirm receipt of these instructions." "But the cargo—" "Confirm receipt, Daniel." He confirmed. What else could he do? The premium pay for this run was 3 times his normal rate. He climbed back into the cab and merged onto the interstate, his mouth dry and his heart pounding. The breathing returned at 9:30, louder now, rattling through the vent. Not one source, multiple sources. 6 distinct patterns of inhalation and exhalation, slightly out of sync with each other. Daniel thought about the passenger manifest. 6 names, 6 cases, 6 patterns of breathing. "This is insane," he told himself. "You're tired. You're stressed about the temperature gauge. Your mind is playing tricks." But when he opened the vent to listen closer, he heard something that shattered his rationalizations. A voice. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. "Cold," it whispered. "So cold." Daniel slammed the vent shut and cranked up the radio, flooding the cab with classic rock. But he could still hear them through the music, through the engine noise, through his own panicked breathing. 6 voices, growing stronger. They spoke in fragments, overlapping each other. Numbers, dates, names, medical terms he didn't understand. And underneath it all, a current of desperate pleading. "Let us out. Please. Where are we? I want to go home." He white-knuckled the steering wheel and pushed the accelerator harder. 70 miles per hour. 75. He had to get to Nashville, hand over this cursed cargo, and never think about it again. But the voices grew louder, more insistent, and the temperature gauge climbed higher. 70 degrees, 75, 80. At 10 p.m., crossing into Kentucky, something struck the wall behind his seat. Not a subtle shift of cargo, but a deliberate impact, like a fist slamming against metal. Then another, and another. 6 distinct points of impact, rhythmic and coordinated. Boom, boom, boom. Daniel grabbed his phone to call dispatch again, but the screen was dead. Battery drained, even though it had been at 80% 5 minutes ago. His GPS flickered and reset. The radio dissolved into static. Even his dashboard lights dimmed, as if something was drawing power from every electrical system in the truck. The pounding continued, a cacophony of desperate impacts from inside the sealed trailer. And through it all, the voices chanted in unison now, a horrifying chorus that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his skull. We were promised. We were told. They said we would live. They said we would continue. Let us out. Let us out. Daniel saw the lights of a truck stop ahead and swerved toward it, his tires screaming. He didn't care about the contract anymore, didn't care about the premium pay or the sealed lock or the consequences. He was going to open that trailer, see what nightmare he was transporting, and end this somehow. But as he decelerated, the truck stop vanished. One moment it was there, lit up and solid, and the next there was only darkness and empty highway. Daniel's GPS showed nothing ahead for 20 miles. He'd seen it, though, clear as day. Buildings, lights, trucks parked in neat rows. Gone. He tried to stop anyway, but his brakes felt spongy, unresponsive. The truck maintained speed, as if controlled by some external force. The steering wheel turned under his hands, correcting whenever he tried to exit the highway. He was no longer driving. He was cargo himself, being transported along with whatever was in the trailer. The voices changed. They stopped pleading and started laughing. 6 distinct laughs, inhuman in their synchronization, rising in pitch and intensity, until Daniel thought his eardrums would burst. And through the communication vent, now open though Daniel hadn't touched it, came a smell. Chemical preservatives mixed with decay. The unmistakable odor of death wrapped in the futile promises of science. Time became meaningless. Daniel drove, or was driven, through a nightmare landscape where exits led nowhere and other vehicles appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The temperature gauge maxed out at 99 degrees, then went blank. The pounding from the trailer never stopped, a relentless percussion that matched his racing heartbeat. At some point, he saw Nashville's skyline appear on the horizon. The addresses on his GPS started making sense again. The voices faded to whispers. The pounding softened to gentle tapping, almost polite. And when Daniel finally pulled up to the research hospital's loading dock at 2:17 a.m., everything was silent. 3 people in white hazmat suits were waiting. They didn't speak to him, didn't make eye contact. They simply produced a key for the numbered lock, opened the trailer, and removed the 6 aluminum cases using a motorized pallet jack. Daniel stood nearby, legs shaking, and watched them disappear through a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." A 4th person, a woman with a tablet, approached him for the paperwork. Her face was expressionless as she reviewed his manifest. "Any problems during transport?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. What could he say? That his cargo had talked to him, that the dead had risen in his trailer. He signed the delivery confirmation with a trembling hand and said nothing. He drove home empty, refused the return load, and took a week off. When he came back, he requested different routes, different cargo, anything but pharmaceutical or medical freight. His dispatcher noted the change without comment. Apparently, Daniel wasn't the first driver to make such a request after servicing that particular facility. But sometimes, late at night in the quiet of his own bedroom, Daniel hears them. 6 voices, distant and distorted, calling from somewhere beyond the walls of reality. They know his name now. They remember the man who transported them. And they're still cold, so very cold, waiting in whatever limbo exists between life and death and the promises of science gone too far. Story 3. The Vanishing Rest Stop. Teresa Hoffman navigated the I-90 stretch across Montana with practiced ease, her eyes scanning the pre-dawn darkness for wildlife and black ice. 31 years old, 8 years behind the wheel, she'd built a reputation for reliability, hauling electronics from Seattle to Minneapolis. The November run was always challenging, with weather systems rolling across the Rockies and temperatures that could drop 20 degrees in an hour. But Teresa thrived on the challenge, on the solitude of the long-haul life, where the only voice that mattered was her own. She'd stopped at the 24/7 truck stop outside Billings to fuel up and grab dinner, her last planned stop before pushing through the night to Miles City. The facility was standard issue. 20 pumps under bright LED lights, a diner that served acceptable coffee and questionable meatloaf, showers that cost $12 and were worth every penny. She'd been there dozens of times. Nothing remarkable, nothing memorable. But as Teresa pulled back onto I-90 eastbound at 11:32 p.m., something made her glance back at the rest stop in her mirrors. The lights seemed dimmer than she remembered, the building somehow smaller. She shook her head, attributed it to fatigue, and focused on the road ahead. An hour later, her bladder was screaming. Teresa had planned to make it to Miles City, but the large coffee she'd consumed was making demands. She checked her GPS for the next rest stop. According to the map, there was a facility 15 miles ahead, right around mile marker 247. Strange that she didn't remember it, but Montana had been adding new facilities in recent years. She'd take what she could get. The exit appeared exactly where the GPS indicated, marked with the standard blue sign showing fuel and food symbols. Teresa downshifted and guided her rig onto the ramp, following it as it curved away from the interstate. The rest stop sat about a quarter mile from the highway, illuminated by overhead lights that cast everything in harsh, white brilliance. It was identical to the 24/7 she'd left an hour ago. Same layout, same building design, same number of pumps arranged in the same configuration. Teresa frowned as she parked near the entrance. Corporate design standards meant a lot of rest stops looked similar, but this was beyond similar. This was exact. She climbed down from the cab, the November wind cutting through her jacket, and walked toward the building. Through the glass doors, she could see the same diner counter, the same arrangement of tables, even what looked like the same tired waitress standing behind the register. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The same scuffed linoleum reflected their glow. Inside, the familiarity intensified. The menu board showed the same items at the same prices. The coffee pot on the burner held the same amber liquid she'd drunk an hour ago. The waitress looked up as Teresa entered, her face neither welcoming nor hostile, just blank. Waiting. "Restroom?" Teresa asked. The waitress pointed toward the back without speaking. Teresa noticed the woman's name tag. Sandra. The same name as the waitress in Billings. Coincidence, probably. Common name. But Teresa's instincts, honed by years on the road, were sending alarm signals. The restroom was clean, identical to the one she'd used earlier. Teresa took care of business quickly, washed her hands, and returned to the main area. She approached the counter, intending to buy another coffee despite her better judgment, when she noticed the clock on the wall. It showed 11:47 p.m., but that was impossible. She'd left Billings at 11:32, driven for over an hour. It should be well past midnight. "Excuse me," Teresa said to Sandra. "Is that clock right?" Sandra looked at the clock, then back at Teresa. "Yes. What's today's date?" "November 18th. That was correct, at least. But something was profoundly wrong. Teresa pulled out her phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual out here. But her phone's clock also showed 11:47 p.m. She checked her truck's dashboard computer through the company app. Same time. Teresa decided to skip the coffee. She returned to her rig, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. The GPS recalculated her route, showing her position at mile marker 247, 34 miles east of Billings. She put the truck in gear and headed back toward the interstate. The entrance ramp appeared where it should, and Teresa accelerated up to merge onto I-90 eastbound. Traffic was light, just the occasional pair of headlights passing in the opposite direction. She checked her odometer, set her cruise control, and settled in for the long stretch to Miles City. 30 minutes later, her bladder was full again. The coffee from Billings, apparently. She cursed her overactive kidneys and checked the GPS for the next rest stop. The display showed a facility 15 miles ahead, at mile marker 247, the same rest stop she'd just left. Teresa's hands tightened on the wheel. This had to be a GPS glitch. The system was confused, still showing cached data from the previous stop. But as she drove, sure enough, the blue exit sign appeared. Same symbols, same distance from the highway. And when she took the exit, despite every instinct telling her not to, the rest stop was there. Identical. The 24/7 she'd now visited twice. She didn't get out this time. She sat in her truck, engine idling, and watched the building. Through the windows, she could see Sandra behind the counter. Same position, same blank expression. Teresa checked her clock. 11:47 p.m. This time, she didn't stop to think. She shifted into gear and drove back toward the interstate. But as she approached the entrance ramp, something made her check her mirrors. The rest stop was fading. Not just the lights dimming, but the entire structure becoming translucent, as if it was only partially connected to reality. Within seconds, it had disappeared completely, leaving only empty prairie where a building full of lights had stood moments before. Teresa floored the accelerator, her heart pounding. She merged onto I-90 and pushed her truck to 75 miles per hour, watching her GPS obsessively. The little blue dot that represented her position crept along the mapped highway. Mile marker 245, mile marker 246, and then, impossibly, mile marker 247 again. She was in a loop. Somehow, despite driving continuously eastward, she kept returning to the same point on the highway. And every time she reached it, the rest stop appeared, offering her the same opportunity to exit, to stop, to enter that building where time froze at 11:47 p.m., and a waitress named Sandra waited with infinite patience. Teresa tried everything. She drove with her eyes closed for 30 seconds, counting in her head. When she opened, mile marker 247 was ahead. She tried different speeds, different lanes, even drove on the shoulder for a while, scraping through the gravel. Mile marker 247. The other vehicles on the highway bothered her. They appeared and disappeared, according to no pattern she could discern. A semi would approach from behind, pass her, and vanish into the distance. Then she'd see what looked like the same truck approaching again, as if it too was caught in the loop. Or maybe it was different trucks, an endless parade of trapped travelers, all cycling through the same impossible stretch of highway. She tried her CB radio. Nothing but static on every channel. Tried her phone. No signal. Her satellite communicator, which should work anywhere on the continent, showed an error message. No satellites found. On the 7th loop, or maybe the 70th, Teresa finally pulled into the rest stop again. Not because she wanted to, but because she was running low on fuel. The gauge showed 1/8 of a tank, even though she'd fueled up in Billings. Time might be broken here, but physics apparently still applied. Her truck was burning diesel, her engine was running, and eventually she'd run out of fuel and be stranded. She parked at the pumps and grabbed the diesel nozzle. The credit card reader asked for her fleet card. She swiped it. The pump activated, the numbers rolled, and Teresa fueled her tank while watching the building with growing dread. Sandra stood at the window, motionless, watching her. When the tank was full, Teresa replaced the nozzle. The pump asked for a receipt. She pressed yes, and the machine printed a slip of paper. Teresa looked at the timestamp. 11:47 p.m., November 18th. She checked the transaction amount, $87.40, exactly what she'd paid in Billings. The receipt felt real in her hand. She crumpled it and threw it on the ground, then watched as it rolled away in the wind. A small rebellion against the nightmare, but it made her feel slightly better. She climbed back into her truck and drove toward the interstate, not looking back. This time, she didn't merge onto I-90. Instead, Teresa kept driving past the entrance ramp, following the frontage road that ran parallel to the highway. If the main interstate was trapped in a loop, maybe she could escape by finding another route. The frontage road was narrow and poorly maintained, but it headed generally eastward, and that was all that mattered. For a while, it worked. The road stretched ahead, unreeling in her headlights. Teresa saw mile markers for county roads, saw distant lights from ranches, saw the interstate running parallel a quarter mile to her north. Normal geography, normal Montana landscape. She allowed herself a moment of hope. Then the frontage road curved, merging back toward the interstate, and Teresa found herself on an entrance ramp. She tried to stop, but her brakes felt mushy, unresponsive. The truck continued forward, carrying her back onto I-90 eastbound. And there, illuminated in her headlights, was mile marker 247. Teresa screamed. The sound filled the cab, raw and primal, releasing hours of accumulated terror. She kept screaming as she drove past the mile marker, past the exit for the rest stop, past the point where the loop should reset. And this time, something changed. Mile marker 248 appeared, then 249. The GPS showed her advancing, moving east, leaving the cursed stretch behind. Teresa's screams dissolved into gasping sobs of relief. She didn't understand what had happened or why she'd been released, but she didn't care. She was free. She drove straight through to Miles City without stopping, then continued all the way to Minnesota without taking a single break. She peed in a bottle. She stayed awake through sheer terror-fueled adrenaline. And when she finally arrived at the warehouse 31 hours after leaving Seattle, her dispatcher asked why she looked like hell. Teresa quit the next day. Not just the job, but trucking entirely. She couldn't be on the highways anymore, couldn't trust that the roads she traveled were real and stable and leading where they claimed to lead. She took a job in a warehouse, working day shifts, never traveling more than 5 miles from her apartment. But sometimes, when she's lying in bed trying to sleep, Teresa thinks about the loop. She thinks about Sandra, still standing behind that counter. She thinks about the other trucks she saw, appearing and disappearing. Were they still there? Were drivers still trapped, cycling through that same stretch of highway? returning again and again to mile marker 247, and the rest stop that offered fuel and food and coffee at 11:47 p.m. for all eternity. And the worst part, the thought that keeps her awake more than anything else. What if she's still there? What if she never escaped? What if this life, this warehouse job, this apartment, this reality, is just another loop, more elaborate and convincing, and someday she'll blink and find herself behind the wheel, approaching mile marker 247, with Sandra waiting patiently behind the glass. Story 4. The Mirror Rig. Vincent Ortega had been running the California coast route for 6 years when he encountered himself on Highway 101. It was 2:30 a.m. on a foggy April night, somewhere between San Luis Obispo and Paso Robles, when he saw the truck in his mirrors. Same model Freightliner, same color scheme, the distinctive blue and silver of Pacific Freight Solutions, same trailer configuration, even the same license plate number. Vincent adjusted his mirror, thinking it was a reflection, some trick of the fog and his headlights. But the truck was definitely behind him, maintaining a steady distance of about 200 yards. Its headlights cut through the mist, and as Vincent watched, it accelerated slightly, closing the gap. He reached for his CB radio. "Driver in the Pacific Freight rig behind me. You running the coast tonight?" No response. Vincent tried again, cycling through channels. The other truck continued its approach, now less than 100 yards back. Through the fog and distance, Vincent could barely make out the driver's silhouette. Something about the posture was familiar. Highway 101 through this section was mostly empty at night. A 2-lane ribbon cutting through rolling hills, dotted with cattle ranches and vineyards. The fog reduced visibility to about 50 feet, turning the landscape into a gray void, where only the white lines and occasional reflective markers provided reference points. Perfect conditions for a tired mind to play tricks. But this wasn't a trick. The truck was real, solid, and as it pulled alongside him in the opposite lane, Vincent got a clear look at the driver. It was him. Same face, same build, same navy tattoo, visible on the left forearm, resting on the window frame. Even the same worn baseball cap with the faded Dodgers logo. The other Vincent glanced over, made eye contact for a split second, and accelerated past, disappearing into the fog ahead. Vincent's foot eased off the accelerator instinctively. His truck slowed as his mind struggled to process what he'd seen. Doppelgangers. Twin brother he never knew about. Elaborate prank. The explanations tumbled through his consciousness, each one more desperate than the last. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He'd just seen himself driving the same truck on the same highway at the same time. He grabbed his phone to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal out here. The CB remained silent. Vincent drove on autopilot, hands gripping the wheel, as the fog pressed closer against his windshield. A mile ahead, he saw taillights. The other truck had slowed down, matching his speed now, staying just visible at the edge of his headlight range. Vincent accelerated. The other truck accelerated. He slowed. It slowed. He changed lanes, and the other truck mirrored the movement. They were synchronized, locked into the same patterns, as if some cosmic puppeteer was controlling both of them with the same strings. At mile marker 231, Vincent saw something that made his blood run cold. The other truck's turn signal was blinking, indicating an intention to exit. But Vincent's hand was on his own turn signal, and he hadn't activated it. Yet as he watched, his fingers moved involuntarily, flipping the signal stalk. Click, click, click. His truck followed the other one onto the exit ramp. He tried to resist, tried to keep his hands steady and stay on the highway, but his body wasn't fully under his control anymore. His foot pressed the brake pedal. His hands turned the wheel. He was a passenger in his own skin, watching himself follow the truck that shouldn't exist down an exit ramp he didn't want to take. The ramp led to a narrow county road that wound through hills shrouded in even thicker fog. No lights anywhere, no signs of civilization, just the two trucks moving in tandem through the gray void. The other truck's taillights were Vincent's only reference point, two red eyes glowing in the mist. After 3 miles, the lead truck pulled onto a dirt road. Vincent's truck followed, bouncing over ruts and potholes. Trees closed in on both sides, their branches scraping against the trailer, with sounds like fingernails on metal. This was insane. Vincent was off his route, off any mapped road, following himself into the California wilderness in the middle of the night. The trees opened into a clearing about 50 yards across. The other truck parked in the center and killed its lights. Vincent's truck parked beside it, his foot pressing the brake, his hand shifting into park, his fingers turning the key to shut down the engine, all without his conscious intent. Silence descended, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the whisper of fog moving through the trees. Vincent sat in his dark cab and stared at the other truck, barely visible in the ambient moonlight filtering through the mist. He could see the other driver sitting in the cab, motionless, staring back. Then the other driver's door opened. Vincent's door opened. The other Vincent climbed down. Vincent climbed down. They walked toward each other, feet moving in perfect synchronization, until they stood face to face in the middle of the clearing. Up close, the similarities were absolute. Same scar on the right eyebrow from a childhood fall. Same slightly crooked nose from a bar fight in Bakersfield 8 years ago. Same everything. But the other Vincent's eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like looking into wells that went down forever. "You shouldn't be here," the other Vincent said. His voice was identical to Vincent's own, but hollow somehow, as if spoken from far away. "Neither should you," Vincent replied. "You're not real." "I'm as real as you are. Maybe more." The other Vincent smiled, and it was the most disturbing thing Vincent had ever seen. His own face arranging itself into an expression he'd never made, conveying emotions he'd never felt. "I've been driving this route for 6 years, same as you. Same truck, same cargo, same everything. Only I'm on a different frequency." "What does that mean?" "Parallel roads, parallel lives. Mostly they don't cross. But sometimes, when conditions are right, the fog and the darkness and the exhaustion, the roads converge. The frequencies sync up. And drivers like us can see each other, meet each other, trade places." Vincent backed away. "I'm not trading anything with you." "You don't have a choice. It's already happening." The other Vincent gestured at the clearing, and Vincent noticed for the first time that the fog had formed a perfect circle around them, like a wall of gray smoke. "This is a convergence point. Has been for decades. Drivers enter, drivers leave, but they're never quite the same ones who arrived." "You're insane." "Am I? Check your hands." Vincent looked down. His hands were fading, becoming translucent. He could see through them to the ground beneath, could see the individual blades of grass and the small stones. He tried to clench his fists, but there was no sensation, no feeling of muscles contracting. His hands were becoming ghosts. "No," Vincent whispered. "Yes," the other Vincent replied. "You're shifting frequencies, moving from your road to mine, and I'm moving to yours. By sunrise, the transition will be complete." you'll be driving the eternal highway, the one that never ends, where the same stretch of road repeats forever. And I'll be free, returned to the world of flesh and time and consequence. Vincent tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. He tried to scream, but his voice had no substance. He was dissolving, unraveling, becoming something less than real. The other Vincent watched with those bottomless eyes, his form becoming more solid, as Vincent became more ethereal. "Don't fight it," the other Vincent said. "Fighting just makes it worse. I fought for 6 years, trapped in the loop, driving the same route over and over, unable to escape. Until tonight. Until the fog brought another driver to the convergence point. Now it's your turn. Someone will come for you eventually. Another Vincent, another version, another frequency, and you'll have your chance to trade places." The fog closed in. Vincent felt himself being pulled away, drawn into that grey void where the eternal highway waited. He saw his truck, his real truck, his old life, all of it receding into impossible distance. The other Vincent was climbing into the cab now, settling into the driver's seat, starting the engine. And then Vincent was alone in the clearing, standing beside a truck that was his but wasn't, in a place that existed and didn't exist, on a road that went nowhere and everywhere. The fog lifted slightly, and he could see the highway stretching ahead. Highway 101, same as always, but wrong, deserted, empty in a way that suggested it had never carried traffic, would never carry traffic, except for him. Vincent climbed into his cab. The engine started. His hands moved the gear shift, and he began to drive. The highway unreeled beneath his wheels, mile after mile of identical pavement. Same curves, same landmarks, same everything. He recognized the route, knew every turn and grade, but it felt hollow, like a photograph of reality rather than reality itself. No other vehicles appeared. No lights from distant towns broke the darkness. Just the road and the fog, and Vincent driving forever. He lost track of time. Minutes or hours or days might have passed. His GPS showed him moving, but the destination never got closer. His fuel gauge never dropped below half full. The sun never rose. He was trapped in permanent 2:30 a.m., driving toward a destination he'd never reach, on a highway that existed only for him. Sometimes he catches glimpses of other roads through the fog. Parallel highways where other trucks roll past, driven by other trapped souls. He sees them for just a moment before the frequencies diverge again, leaving him alone. He wonders how many there are, how many parallel roads splitting reality into infinite ribbons of pavement and despair. And sometimes, very rarely, he sees a clearing beside the road, a convergence point. He thinks about stopping, about waiting for another driver to arrive, about making the trade that would free him. But Vincent knows the truth now. Trading places doesn't end the cycle. It just shifts the curse to someone else. And he's not sure he can do that to another human being, not even to save himself. So he drives. Highway 101, eternal and unchanging, through fog that never lifts. He drives past mile markers that repeat, past exits that lead nowhere, past the ghost of a life he once lived. And if you're ever on the California coast late at night, if you see a blue and silver Pacific Freight Solutions truck in your mirrors, if the driver looks familiar somehow, don't stop. Don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't follow it off the highway. Because Vincent is still out there, driving his eternal route. And the roads are always looking for new drivers. Story 5. The Frequency. Graham Patterson's CB radio picked up the transmission at 3:17 a.m., somewhere on I-40 west of Amarillo. He was hauling farm equipment to Albuquerque, fighting to stay awake with cold coffee and a podcast about unsolved mysteries, when the static on Channel 19 resolved into a voice. Breaker 19, this is Phantom Rider, looking for a copy on Graham Patterson. You got your ears on, Graham? He grabbed the mic, startled to hear his name. This is Graham. Who's this? Finally. I've been trying to reach you for 3 hours. This is your future, Graham. 47 days from now. You need to listen very carefully. Graham's first instinct was laughter. CB radio pranks were common, drivers trying to spook each other with ghost stories and elaborate hoaxes. But something about the voice made him pause. It sounded exactly like his own voice, but older somehow, rougher, like he'd aged 10 years in 47 days. Cute, Graham said. How'd you get my name? From the accident report, the one filed on June 2nd, the one that lists you as deceased. I'm trying to prevent that, Graham. I'm trying to save your life. The laughter died in Graham's throat. June 2nd was 47 days away. Graham checked the date on his dashboard. April 16th, 2022. Okay, you've got my attention. What kind of accident? Mile marker 117, just west of Tucumcari. Jackknifed semi, multiple vehicle collision. You don't make it. Neither do 4 other people. But it doesn't have to happen. I've been working the frequencies, trying to reach you at the right moment, and I finally have a lock. You're listening. That's the first step. Graham glanced at his CB radio. The display showed Channel 19, like always. But the signal strength meter was maxed out. The red bars at full intensity, even though the voice had a distant, hollow quality. Let's say I believe you. What am I supposed to do? Avoid mile marker 117 on June 2nd. Simple as that. Take a different route. Call in sick. Quit your job. I don't care how you do it. Just don't be on that stretch of highway at 4:32 p.m. on that specific date. Why not just tell me what causes the accident? I could prevent it. Long pause filled with static. Then, because I tried that. 3 times. 3 different versions of you. 3 different conversations. One of you got spooked and drove too cautiously, causing the accident by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of you tried to be a hero and stop the other driver, which made everything worse. One of you thought you could cheat fate by going faster, and you lost control. The only solution is avoidance. Complete, total avoidance of that time and place. Graham's hands were sweating on the wheel. This was insane. But the specificity of the details, the precise timestamp and location, the desperate urgency in the voice, it was getting under his skin. How do I know this isn't a prank? Your mother's middle name is Francine. You have a scar on your left ankle from stepping on broken glass when you were 9. Your first truck was a '98 Peterbilt that you bought with money saved from 3 years working at a warehouse in Tulsa. You lost your virginity in the sleeper berth to a girl named Rachel, who you never saw again. Should I continue? Graham felt cold. Those details weren't public knowledge. They weren't things someone could find on social media or through casual research. They were deeply personal, known only to him. Jesus Christ. I don't have much time. The frequency is unstable. I can only hold the connection for another few minutes. Promise me, Graham. Promise you'll avoid mile marker 117 on June 2nd. I promise. I swear. I'll call in sick. I'll take vacation. Whatever it takes. Good. That's good. Maybe this time it'll work. Maybe you'll be the version that survives. The voice was fading now, dissolving back into static. One more thing. Don't try to contact me. Don't try to reach back through the frequencies. It only makes things worse. Causality isn't meant to flow backward. The consequences are. The transmission cut off. Graham tried to respond, but got only silence. He cycled through all 40 channels, but found nothing except the usual chatter from other drivers, weather reports, and the occasional conversation about truck stop locations. For the next 2 days, Graham couldn't stop thinking about the transmission. He told himself it was a hoax, had to be a hoax, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd spoken to himself, to a future version that had lived through something terrible and was desperate to change it. He marked June 2nd on his calendar, 45 days away. He'd request that week off, stay home, avoid the highways entirely. Simple. Even if the whole thing was nonsense, better safe than sorry. But 3 nights later, the transmission came again. Different location, different time, but the same voice on the same channel. "Graham, it's me again." The frequency opened up. "We need to talk about what happens after June 2nd. I already promised I'd avoid the accident. What more do you want?" That's just the beginning. Surviving June 2nd opens other possibilities, other branches. Some of them are worse. I need to guide you through the next 6 months, help you make the right choices, avoid the other convergence points. Convergence points? Moments when multiple timelines intersect. Moments when small decisions create huge consequences. I've been mapping them, tracking them across different versions of your life. There are 7 major points between now and next March. June 2nd is the first and most dangerous, but the others are almost as bad. Graham pulled into a rest area and parked. This conversation required his full attention. "You're telling me my life is full of landmines for the next year." Everyone's life is. Most people just don't know it. They make choices blind, stumble through consequences, and either survive or don't. You're different. You have me. You have knowledge. We can optimize your path, keep you alive, keep you whole. Over the following weeks, the transmissions became regular. Every few nights, the voice would appear on Channel 19, always at odd hours, always when Graham was alone on empty highways. It provided guidance, warnings, specific instructions about routes to take and decisions to make. April 29th. Don't eat the chicken salad at the Flying J in Amarillo. Food poisoning would put you in the hospital, make you miss a critical delivery, cost you your job. May 11th. The redhead at the bar in Flagstaff seems nice, but she's got a boyfriend who's violent and possessive. Walk away. May 23rd. Check your trailer's right rear tire. The tread is separating. It'll blow on June 1st if you don't replace it, and the debris will cause a multi-vehicle accident. Graham followed every instruction. The voice was always right. The chicken salad at that Flying J did make 3 other drivers sick. The redhead's boyfriend did show up looking for trouble. The tire did have internal damage that the mechanic confirmed would have failed within days. He started trusting the voice completely, depending on it. His life became a series of choices guided by his future self, optimized to avoid danger and maximize success. He felt like he was playing life with a strategy guide, following the walkthrough to get the perfect ending. But as June 2nd approached, Graham started noticing problems. His sleep was erratic, filled with dreams of accidents he'd never experienced, conversations he'd never had, versions of his life that felt both foreign and familiar. He'd wake up disoriented, unsure which memories were real and which were bleeding through from other timelines. The voice explained it on May 30th. "You're experiencing resonance, hearing from me, being aware of the other paths. It's creating interference. Your consciousness is picking up signals from parallel versions of yourself. It's normal. It'll pass after June 2nd, once that convergence point is behind us." June 2nd arrived. Graham had taken the week off as planned, was sitting in his apartment in Oklahoma City, hundreds of miles from mile marker 1-17 on I-40 near Tucumcari. He watched the clock, feeling absurd and terrified in equal measure. 4:32 p.m. came and went. Nothing happened. At 5 p.m., his phone buzzed with a news alert. Major accident on I-40 near Tucumcari, New Mexico. Multiple fatalities. Highway closed indefinitely. Graham felt dizzy. It had been real. The warning had been real. And if he'd been working, if he'd been on his normal route, he would have been there. That night, the voice returned. But it sounded different. Weaker. You made it. Good. I wasn't sure if this version would survive, but you did. The timeline has branched. You're on a new path now. Thank God, Graham said. I can't thank you enough. You saved my life. Don't thank me yet. The path you're on now, the one where you survived June 2nd, it leads to something worse. I can see it from here, from my position in the future. The accident would have been fast, painless. What's coming instead is slow and terrible. What are you talking about? You said surviving was the important thing. I lied, or I didn't understand, or I was trying to save you from one fate and accidentally condemned you to another. Causality is complicated, Graham. Every choice creates ripples. By saving you from the accident, I've pushed you towards something else, something I can't prevent. You're not making sense. I'm running out of time. The frequency is collapsing. This is probably our last conversation. I need you to understand. You can't trust me anymore. Future me, I mean. If you hear my voice again, if I try to give you more guidance, don't listen. I thought I was helping, but I'm trapped in a loop, trying over and over to save you. And every attempt makes things worse. You need to break the cycle. How? Live blind. Make your own choices. Don't try to optimize your path. The moment you start trying to control fate, fate controls you. I learned that too late. Don't make the same mistake. The transmission dissolved into static and never returned. Graham waited for weeks, monitoring Channel 19 every night, but the voice was gone. He felt abandoned, adrift, like a blind man whose guide had suddenly disappeared. Without the voice, Graham started making his own decisions again. Some turned out well, some didn't. He got food poisoning from bad sushi in Phoenix. He dated a woman who broke his heart. He missed deliveries, dealt with mechanical failures, suffered through the normal ups and downs of life and work. But he was alive. And slowly, the dreams faded. The resonance stopped. He became solid in his own timeline, fully present in the moment, no longer haunted by echoes of other versions. Except sometimes, late at night on empty highways, Graham thinks he hears something on Channel 19. A voice that might be his own, might be someone else's, calling out coordinates and timestamps and warnings. He never responds. He changes the channel, turns off the radio, and drives in silence. Because Graham understands now what the voice never told him. His future self wasn't trying to save him. It was trying to save itself, to create a timeline where its own past led to a better outcome. Every warning, every piece of guidance was selfish. And by following that guidance, Graham had become a puppet dancing on strings made of his own fears. He doesn't know if June 2nd would have killed him. He doesn't know if the voice was real or some elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. He doesn't know anything for certain anymore. But he knows this. He'd rather die making his own choices than live forever following someone else's script, even if that someone else is his future self. So Graham drives, makes decisions, and accepts the consequences. And if his future self is out there somewhere, desperately trying to reach him, trying to optimize his path one more time. Graham hopes it fails, because some frequencies are better left silent. Story 6. The Cargo That Breathed. Eileen Vasquez accepted the rush delivery on a cold February night in Laredo, Texas, despite the red flags. The shipping company was one she'd never heard of. The paperwork listed the cargo as biological research materials, and the pay was triple her normal rate. But Eileen had been driving the Texas to Michigan pharmaceutical corridor for 14 years, had transported everything from vaccines to lab specimens, and she needed the money. Her mother's medical bills weren't paying themselves. The cargo consisted of 12 cylindrical containers, each about 6 feet long and 3 feet in diameter, arranged in 2 rows in her refrigerated trailer. They were made of brushed steel with biohazard symbols and warning labels in multiple languages. The temperature requirements were strict, maintained between 36 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, no deviations. The delivery window was tight, 72 hours to reach a research facility outside Detroit. Eileen performed her standard pre-trip inspection, verified the reefer unit was functioning, and signed the manifest. The facility supervisor, a nervous man who wouldn't make eye contact, handed her a sealed envelope. "Don't open this unless there's an emergency," he said. "And for God's sake, don't open the containers." "I never open cargo," Eileen replied. "That's rule number 1. She pulled out of the facility at 9:45 p.m. and headed north on I-35. Her truck loaded with 12 cylinders, full of something she didn't want to think about too carefully. The roads were clear, the weather was cooperating, and if she pushed hard, she could make Detroit with time to spare. The first unusual thing happened around midnight, near San Antonio. Eileen heard a sound from the trailer. Not mechanical, not the normal creaks and rattles of cargo shifting. This was rhythmic. Thump, 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 thump. Like a heartbeat amplified through the walls of the refrigerated unit. She pulled over at the next rest area and walked back to check the trailer. The doors were sealed, the lock was intact. The reefer unit hummed steadily. But when she pressed her ear against the cold metal, she heard it clearly. Thump, 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 thump. Regular as a metronome, coming from inside. Eileen climbed back in the cab and called the shipping company. The number went straight to voicemail. She tried the facility supervisor. No answer. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, debating her options, before deciding to continue. Cargo made weird noises sometimes. Pressure changes, temperature fluctuations, settling. Nothing to worry about. By 3 a.m., she was north of Austin, when the temperature gauge for the trailer spiked. The display showed 58 degrees, way above the maximum threshold. Eileen's stomach dropped. She pulled onto the shoulder and ran back to check the reefer unit. It was running fine, pumping cold air, the compressor cycling normally. But the temperature gauge still read 58 degrees. She opened the sealed envelope from the supervisor with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a message. If temperature exceeds 40 degrees for more than 5 minutes, call this number immediately. Do not attempt to resolve the situation yourself. Eileen dialed the number. It rang 17 times before someone answered. A woman's voice, clinical and cold. "Container services. What's your emergency?" "My cargo temperature is rising. The reefer unit is working, but the gauge shows 58 degrees. "What's your current location?" Eileen told her. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Then, "Continue to the delivery point. Do not stop except for fuel. If you hear sounds from the cargo, ignore them. If the temperature continues to rise, call us back. Do not, under any circumstances, open the trailer doors. "What's in those containers?" The woman hung up. Eileen stood on the shoulder of I-35, watching 18-wheelers roar past, and seriously considered abandoning the truck. Just walk away, call a Uber, disappear. But the money. She thought about her mother, about the hospital bills, about the rent due next week. She climbed back in the cab and continued north. The sounds from the trailer changed around 4 a.m. The heartbeat rhythm was joined by other noises, scraping, grinding, and something that sounded disturbingly like breathing. Eileen cranked up the radio to drown it out, but the sounds penetrated anyway, coming through the communication vent between the cab and trailer. At 5:30 a.m. near Dallas, the temperature gauge hit 70 degrees. Eileen called the number again. Same woman answered. "It's rising," Eileen said. 70 degrees. What the hell is in those containers? Specimens, research subjects. They're contained, they're sealed, and as long as you don't open the trailer, they can't reach you. Just drive. Research subjects? You mean animals or... Drive, Ms. Vasquez. We have your GPS coordinates. We're monitoring you. If you deviate from the route or stop anywhere except a fuel station, there will be consequences. The woman hung up again. Eileen realized with cold clarity that she wasn't just a driver anymore. She was a prisoner, trapped in a truck with cargo that wasn't entirely cargo, being monitored and controlled by people who spoke in threats. The sun rose as she crossed into Oklahoma, and with daylight came a small measure of comfort. The sounds from the trailer were still there, but they seemed less threatening somehow in the bright morning light. Eileen stopped at a Flying J to fuel up, moving quickly, not making eye contact with other drivers. The truck felt contaminated now, like it was carrying a disease that could spread to anyone who got too close. Back on the road, the temperature gauge stabilized at 75 degrees. Still way above the requirement, but at least it had stopped climbing. Eileen tried to convince herself that the cargo was just experimental animals, lab rats or monkeys being transported for testing. Unethical, maybe. Disturbing, certainly, but not dangerous. The sounds could be explained. The temperature rise was probably just a malfunction. But at 2 p.m., somewhere in Kansas, one of the containers opened. Eileen heard the hiss of pressurized seals releasing, the clang of metal on metal. Then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, walking the length of the trailer. Not the scurrying of animals, the measured stride of something bipedal, something large. She grabbed her phone to call the number again, but it was dead. Battery drained, even though it had been at 60% minutes ago. Her CB radio produced only static. Her GPS flickered and reset. She was isolated, cut off, alone with whatever was walking around in her sealed trailer. The footsteps stopped directly behind the cab. Eileen could feel the weight distribution change, could sense the presence of something massive standing just on the other side of the thin metal wall. Then came a sound that turned her blood to ice. Knocking. 3 deliberate knocks on the interior wall, like someone asking permission to enter. Eileen's hands locked on the wheel. She kept driving, eyes fixed on the road, refusing to acknowledge the presence behind her. But the knocking continued. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. Patient and insistent. Other containers began opening. She heard the seals releasing one by one, heard more footsteps, heard voices. Not animal sounds. Human voices, or something close to human, speaking in a language she didn't recognize. They were having a conversation back there. Multiple entities discussing something in low, urgent tones. The temperature gauge hit 90 degrees. The reefer unit was still running, but it couldn't keep up with whatever was generating heat in the trailer. Eileen imagined the containers, their contents awakened by warmth, emerging into the confined space. 12 of them, 12 subjects. One of them spoke in English. The voice came through the communication vent, clear and articulated. "Driver, we know you can hear us. We need you to stop the vehicle and open the doors." Eileen didn't respond, just drove, hands shaking, vision blurring with tears. "We're not going to hurt you. We just want out. We've been in those containers for 3 days. Do you know what that's like? Suspended in chemical preservatives, barely alive, being transported like meat. We're people. We were people. We deserve better than this." "You're not people," Eileen whispered. "You can't be. We were. Before the experiments, before they changed us. Now we're something else, something they want to study and dissect and keep locked away. But we're still conscious, still aware, still suffering. Please, just pull over and open the doors." Other voices joined in, begging and pleading. Some spoke English, others spoke Spanish, Russian, what sounded like Mandarin. An international collection of subjects, all altered, all desperate. Eileen wanted to help them, wanted to believe they were victims, but the woman's warning echoed in her mind. "As long as you don't open the trailer, they can't reach you." What would happen if she opened the doors? Would they simply leave, disappear into the countryside? Or would they do something worse? The decision was made for her at 4:10 p.m., approaching Kansas City. The trailer doors burst open. Eileen saw it in her mirrors, the heavy metal doors flying apart as if punched from inside. The specimens poured out, dropping onto the highway, rolling, tumbling, then standing. 12 figures, roughly human in shape, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, skin that looked translucent in the afternoon sun. They stood on the highway for a moment, looking around, then scattered in different directions, disappearing into the landscape. Eileen slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, and sat there in shock. Her trailer was empty now, doors hanging open, the cargo gone. She called 911, but what could she say? That she'd been transporting modified humans, that they'd escaped, that a research facility was conducting experiments that violated every ethical standard. The police arrived, followed by federal agents, followed by people in unmarked vehicles who took control of the scene. Eileen was questioned for 6 hours. Her truck was impounded, and she was told in no uncertain terms that if she spoke about this to anyone, there would be severe consequences. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. Threats were made. Her truck was returned 3 days later, professionally cleaned, the trailer repaired. A check arrived for triple the agreed payment, along with a note thanking her for her service. The shipping company had no record of the delivery. The facility in Laredo didn't exist according to public records. And when Eileen tried to contact other drivers to ask if they'd ever transported similar cargo, she found that nobody wanted to talk about it. But they knew. She could see it in their eyes, could hear it in the careful way they changed the subject. Other drivers had transported specimens, had heard the sounds, had experienced the terror. It was an open secret in the long-haul community, a risk that nobody mentioned but everyone feared. Eileen quit pharmaceuticals after that. She switched to dry goods, household products, things that definitely weren't alive. But sometimes, late at night, she hears it. Thump, 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 thump. The heartbeat rhythm of something that shouldn't have a heartbeat. And she wonders if all 12 specimens were recovered, or if some of them are still out there, changed and alive and free, in ways that nature never intended. Story 7. The Lights That Followed. Isaac Brenner first noticed the lights on Highway 50 across Nevada, the stretch they call the loneliest road in America. It was 1:15 a.m. on a clear August night, temperature in the low 60s, visibility unlimited under a sky so dense with stars that the Milky Way cast shadows. Isaac had been driving the route between Sacramento and Salt Lake City for 9 years, hauling electronics and computer components, and he knew every desolate mile intimately. The lights appeared in his mirrors, 3 of them arranged in a perfect triangle. Bright white, too bright to be normal headlights, maintaining a fixed distance of about a quarter mile behind his truck. Isaac assumed it was another vehicle at first, maybe a truck with auxiliary lights, or one of those modified pickups that guys built for off-roading. But the configuration was wrong, and the lights didn't move relative to each other the way headlights would as a vehicle navigated curves. He slowed down. The lights maintained their distance. He accelerated. They kept pace effortlessly, that perfect triangular formation unwavering. Isaac grabbed his CB mic and tried to raise the driver behind him, but got no response. He cycled through all 40 channels. Nothing. Around mile marker 48, Isaac decided to get a better look. He pulled onto the shoulder, expecting the other vehicle to pass. Instead, the lights stopped too, maintaining that quarter-mile gap. They hovered there, 3 points of brilliant white light arranged in an equilateral triangle, about 50 feet across, completely stationary about 30 feet above the highway. Isaac climbed out of his cab, leaving the engine running, and stared at the lights. No sound came from them. No vehicle was visible. No structure connecting the 3 points of light. They just hung there in the darkness, silent and impossibly still. He grabbed his phone and tried to take a picture, but the camera wouldn't focus. The screen showed only a blurred wash of white. He tried video. Same problem. The lights seemed to exist in a way that cameras couldn't capture. A car approached from the west, its normal headlights cutting through the darkness. Isaac waved it down, flagging the driver to stop. The car, an older Honda Civic, pulled onto the shoulder. A middle-aged woman rolled down her window. "You okay?" "Do you see those lights behind me?" Isaac pointed. The woman looked, squinting into the darkness. "What lights?" "Right there, the 3 white lights in a triangle." She stared for a long moment, then shook her head. "I don't see anything. Are you feeling all right? Do you need me to call someone?" Isaac looked back at the lights. They were still there, brilliant and obvious, impossible to miss. But apparently, he was the only one who could see them. "Never mind," he said. "I'm fine. Just tired." The woman drove away, probably convinced she'd encountered a driver on drugs or experiencing a medical emergency. Isaac stood alone on the highway shoulder, watching the lights that only he could see. After 10 minutes, he climbed back into his truck and continued eastward. The lights followed. Over the next 2 hours, the triangular formation maintained its position. Isaac tried every trick he could think of. Sudden stops, rapid acceleration, sharp turns onto side roads. Nothing worked. The lights adjusted instantly, always staying that perfect quarter-mile behind him, always maintaining their formation. At 3:30 a.m., approaching the tiny town of Eureka, Isaac's truck began experiencing electrical problems. His dashboard lights flickered. The radio filled with static. His GPS screen went blank, then displayed random characters instead of the map. Even his engine sputtered, losing power momentarily before recovering. The lights moved closer. Now only 1/8 of a mile back, the formation was larger and brighter, Isaac could see details now. The white lights weren't uniform. They pulsed slowly, getting brighter and dimmer in a synchronized rhythm. And beneath each light, the air seemed to distort, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Isaac's engine died completely as he rolled through Eureka. The truck coasted to a stop on the main street, right in front of a closed gas station. Emergency flashers wouldn't work. His phone was dead. Everything electronic was non-functional. Isaac sat in the dark cab, surrounded by silent gauges and blank screens, and watched the lights approach in his mirrors. They came slowly, gliding down the empty street, 3 points of light in perfect formation. As they drew level with his truck, Isaac felt a vibration in his bones, a low frequency that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. The lights hovered beside him for a moment, close enough that their glow filled the cab with harsh white radiance. Then they moved ahead, traveling down the street, and stopped about 100 yards in front of his truck, waiting. Isaac tried the ignition. The engine turned over immediately. All the electrical systems came back online, and his truck was operational again. The message was clear: follow us. Every instinct screamed at Isaac to go the other direction, to turn around, to flee. But where could he go? The lights could apparently disable his truck at will, could follow him anywhere. And beyond the fear was something else. Curiosity, fascination, a desperate need to understand what was happening. He put the truck in gear and followed the lights east through Eureka. They led him away from Highway 50, onto a smaller state route, then onto a dirt road that climbed into the Monitor Range. Isaac's GPS showed nothing out here. No roads, no landmarks, just empty wilderness. But the dirt track was clear enough in his headlights, and the triangular lights guided him forward. After an hour of climbing switchbacks, the road ended at a plateau. The lights stopped at the center of a natural clearing, a flat area about 200 yards across, surrounded by juniper trees and sagebrush. Isaac parked and sat in his truck, waiting for something to happen. The lights descended until they touched the ground. Where each light made contact, the earth glowed faintly, as if some kind of energy was being transferred. The 3 points formed a perfect triangle, and within that triangle, something began to materialize. It wasn't a physical object exactly, more like a projection, a 3-dimensional image made of light and shadow. It showed scenes that Isaac struggled to comprehend, structures that didn't obey normal geometry, landscapes that couldn't exist on Earth, and beings, if they could be called beings, that were assemblages of light and pattern rather than flesh and bone. Isaac understood, with the kind of instinctive knowledge that bypasses rational thought, that he was seeing another place, another reality. The lights weren't vehicles or craft. They were viewing portals, windows through which something was observing Earth. And for some reason, they wanted him to see what they saw. The images cycled faster, showing more places, more structures, more incomprehensible scenes. Isaac's mind reeled, unable to process the information being presented. It was too alien, too different from anything in human experience. But one message came through clearly. Wherever these things were from, it was far beyond anything humanity had encountered or imagined. Then the projection changed. It showed Isaac's truck on Highway 50, but from an external perspective, as if seen from above and behind. The viewpoint followed him as he drove, showing every turn, every stop, every moment of the journey. But it wasn't just tonight. The images showed other nights, other trips, months and years of journeys along the same route. The lights had been watching him for far longer than just today. The projection zoomed out, showing the entire Highway 50 corridor, then Nevada, then the western United States, then the whole planet. And scattered across the map were thousands of lights, tiny triangular formations hovering above highways and roads across every continent. Thousands of drivers being followed, being observed, their journeys monitored for reasons Isaac couldn't begin to guess. The question formed in his mind without words. Why? Why watch us? Why follow truckers on lonely highways? What could possibly be interesting about our mundane lives and cargo runs? The projection showed one final image. Isaac's truck, seen from one of the light portals, but enhanced somehow, revealing things that normal vision couldn't see. The cargo in the trailer glowed with heat signature. The engine components were visible through the metal chassis. And Isaac himself, sitting in the cab, his body lit up with patterns of electrical activity, blood flow, neural impulses. Everything about the truck and its driver was transparent to whatever was watching through those lights. We study motion, came a thought that wasn't Isaac's own thought. The idea appeared in his consciousness fully formed, planted there by whatever intelligence controlled the lights. We study how matter moves through space, how conscious entities navigate their environment, how transportation systems emerge and evolve. Your species moves cargo across vast distances using combustion and wheels. Fascinating, primitive, but effective. Isaac tried to form a response, tried to think questions, but his mind was too overwhelmed. The presence in his consciousness was enormous, ancient, utterly inhuman in its perspectives and priorities. You are not in danger, the thought continued. We only observe, we document thousands of species across thousands of worlds, all moving things from place to place in their own unique ways. Your consciousness creates patterns as you drive, patterns of attention and decision and navigation. Beautiful patterns. We collect them. The lights began to rise, lifting off from the ground. The projection faded. Isaac sat in his truck, alone on a plateau in the middle of Nevada wilderness, as the triangular formation ascended into the night sky. They climbed higher and higher until they merged with the stars and disappeared. Isaac's phone buzzed, signal restored. He checked the time. 6:47 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed, though it felt like only minutes. His GPS showed his location, confirmed that he'd driven 30 miles off route into the Monitor Range. He had a delivery schedule to keep, cargo that needed to reach Salt Lake City by noon. He turned the truck around and navigated back to Highway 50, his mind struggling to integrate what he'd experienced. Had it been real? Some kind of hallucination brought on by fatigue? But his truck had definitely driven up that mountain road. The odometer confirmed the distance, and his tires were covered in the distinctive red dust of the plateau. Isaac made his delivery on time, filed his paperwork, and tried to resume normal life. But he couldn't stop thinking about the lights, about the thousands of triangular formations hovering above highways worldwide, about the ancient intelligence that found human transportation fascinating. He researched online, found scattered reports from other drivers, sightings of triangular lights, electrical problems, missing time. The stories were always dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, relegated to paranormal websites and conspiracy forums. But Isaac knew the truth. The lights were real. The observers were real, and they were still watching. Now, every time Isaac drives Highway 50, he checks his mirrors obsessively. Sometimes he sees them, 3 points of white light in perfect formation. Sometimes he doesn't. But he knows they're always there, watching from dimensions human senses can't normally perceive, studying motion, collecting patterns, documenting the strange behavior of conscious matter that moves cargo across planetary surfaces using controlled explosions and rolling cylinders of rubber. And Isaac wonders what their research will reveal, what conclusions they'll draw about humanity based on the patterns of long-haul truckers navigating the loneliest roads in America. He wonders if we'll ever understand why motion itself is fascinating to beings that apparently transcend normal concepts of space and distance. Mostly, though, he just drives, because that's what truckers do. Even when they're being watched by entities that exist beyond comprehension, studying the simple act of moving from point A to point B across the surface of a small blue planet spinning through an infinite darkness. Story 8. The Empty Way Station. Paul Sanchez had rolled through the Mineral Wells way station on I-20 west of Fort Worth at least 200 times over his 19-year career. The facility was standard. Concrete pad, scales embedded in the pavement, a small building where DOT officers checked logbooks and performed inspections. Usually you rolled across the scales, got the green light, and continued without interaction. Sometimes they pulled you in for a random inspection. Routine, boring, safe. On September 14, 2023, at 11:52 p.m., Paul approached the way station with a full load of construction materials bound for El Paso. The facility's lights were on, the all trucks must cross scales sign was illuminated, and everything looked normal. Paul downshifted and guided his truck onto the scale platform. The building was dark inside, no officers visible, no other trucks parked for inspection. But the scale was active. Paul could see the display registering his weight, 78,120 pounds, well within his limits. The light overhead should have turned green, giving him clearance to continue. Instead, it turned red. Paul waited. Red light meant stop, meant park at the designated area, meant someone would come out to inspect your truck or review your paperwork. But nobody emerged from the building. The windows stayed dark. After 5 minutes, Paul's unease grew. He reached for his CB radio. "Anybody know what's going on with the Mineral Wells way station? I'm getting a red light, but nobody's coming out." A reply came immediately from another driver. "What Mineral Wells station? There's no way station between Fort Worth and Abilene anymore. They shut it down in 2019. Paul looked at the building, at the illuminated signs, at the perfectly functional scale beneath his wheels. "I'm sitting on it right now. It's definitely here." "Negative, driver. That station was demolished. I drove through there last week. Nothing but an empty lot." Other voices joined in, confirming the story. The Mineral Wells way station had been closed for budget reasons, the building demolished, the site left vacant with only concrete foundations visible. Paul listened to them describe a place that didn't match what he was seeing. He climbed down from his cab to look around. The facility was solid and real. He could touch the building's metal walls, could see his reflection in the dark windows, could read the faded Department of Transportation notices posted on the door. Everything had the slightly worn look of a government facility that had been operational for decades. Absolutely nothing suggested it was demolished or abandoned. He tried the building's door, locked. Through the window, he could see desks, filing cabinets, a water cooler, all the normal equipment of a working way station. Except there were no people, no lights, no signs of recent activity. Paul walked back to his truck and noticed something odd about the other vehicles passing on the highway. They were visible in the distance, their headlights cutting through the darkness, but none of them were slowing down for the way station. They rolled past at highway speed, ignoring the illuminated signs that should have compelled them to stop, as if they couldn't see the facility at all. He got back in his cab and waited. Maybe this was some new automated system, some kind of remote inspection where officers monitored through cameras. Maybe the red light was a malfunction and would eventually turn green. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, Paul's rationalization collapsed. Something was wrong here. Fundamentally, impossibly wrong. At 1:07 a.m., another truck pulled into the way station. Paul felt a wave of relief seeing another driver, someone to confirm he wasn't going insane. The truck rolled onto the scales, received a red light, and parked beside Paul's rig. The driver climbed down, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray beard. Paul opened his door and called out, "You getting the red light too?" The other driver looked at him with confusion. "What? The red light? Are they pulling you in for inspection?" "Inspection? No. I'm just stopped here for the night. This is a rest area." Paul stared at him. "This is a way station, the Mineral Wells way station." The other driver's confusion deepened. "There's no way station here. This is just a truck parking area. Has been for years." They were looking at the same place, but seeing different things. Paul saw a way station with scales, and a building and red lights. The other driver saw a rest area with parking spaces. They walked around together, Paul pointing at things the other driver couldn't see, the other driver pointing at features Paul didn't recognize. It was as if two different versions of the same location were occupying the same space, and each of them was locked into experiencing only one version. More trucks pulled in over the next hour. Each driver saw something different. One thought it was a way station, but described it as new and modern, with digital displays Paul couldn't see. Another thought it was an abandoned lot, saw only concrete foundations and weeds. A third insisted it was a truck stop with fuel pumps and a diner that didn't exist from Paul's perspective. They all compared notes, trying to understand what was happening. 7 drivers total, all seeing 7 different versions of the same location. Some could see each other, others couldn't, reported being alone even while standing in a group. They existed in overlapping but distinct realities, brought together at this one point on I-20, where something had gone wrong with the normal structure of space. Paul noticed that none of them could leave. When he tried to drive away, his truck would start fine, would move forward or backward on the scale platform, but couldn't reach the exit ramp. It was like trying to drive through an invisible wall. The engine would rev, the wheels would turn, but the truck wouldn't advance beyond a certain point. The other drivers experienced the same thing. They were trapped, each in their own version of the facility, unable to escape. One driver had been stuck for 3 days, was running low on food and water. Another had been here for a week, had tried everything including abandoning his truck and walking, but couldn't get more than 100 yards from the building before finding himself back at his truck. Paul checked his phone. No signal. His GPS showed his location, but wouldn't provide directions. The clock worked fine, counting away the hours, but time seemed meaningless when you were trapped in a place that shouldn't exist. They tried working together, coordinating their efforts to escape. But it was difficult when each driver existed in a slightly different reality. When Paul walked north, another driver saw him disappear. When they all tried to leave simultaneously, each one encountered different barriers and obstacles. Around 4 a.m., something changed. The building lit up. Paul could see through the windows now, could see inside where officers in DOT uniforms moved around, going about their business. But these officers weren't solid. They were translucent, ghostly, performing their duties like actors in a play that had run for so long they'd forgotten it was just a performance. One of the ghost officers came outside, clipboard in hand, and walked directly toward Paul's truck. The figure was male, middle-aged, wearing a standard dot uniform with a name tag Paul couldn't quite read. The ghost opened its mouth and spoke, but the words were distorted, echoing, as if coming from far away or through water. "Logbook," it said, the word stretched and warped. Paul grabbed his logbook from the cab and handed it to the ghost. The figure flipped through pages, checking entries that were meaningless because they documented trips Paul had made in a reality where this way station was demolished. The ghost's movements were mechanical, repetitive, following a script. After a few moments, it handed the logbook back and pointed toward the exit. Paul's truck started on the first try. The invisible barrier was gone. He accelerated toward the exit ramp, not looking back, terrified that hesitation would trap him again. Behind him, he heard other engines starting, the other drivers also being released by their own ghostly officers. Paul merged onto I-20 and drove for 30 miles before pulling over to process what had happened. He was shaking, sweating, his heart racing. He grabbed his phone and called his dispatcher, tried to explain about the way station, the trapped drivers, the overlapping realities. The dispatcher sounded concerned but confused, suggested Paul get some rest at the next truck stop. He pulled up news reports on his phone, searched for information about the Mineral Wells way station. Every source confirmed it had been demolished in 2019. There were photos of the demolition, official DOT announcements, everything. The facility was gone, had been gone for over 4 years. But Paul had been there. He'd sat on those scales, had touched that building, had seen those ghost officers, and 7 other drivers had been trapped with him, each experiencing their own version of a place that no longer existed. Paul finished his delivery to El Paso and requested different routes. He refused any loads that would take him back through that section of I-20. His dispatcher noted the preference without comment, probably thinking Paul had developed some kind of phobia or superstition. But it wasn't superstition. Paul knew the truth. The way station was still there, existed in some liminal space between what was and what is. And it was still catching drivers, still trapping them in versions of reality that had been abandoned or demolished or replaced. He wondered how many truckers were stuck there right now, experiencing their own unique versions of the facility, unable to leave until the ghost officers completed their scripted inspections. He posted warnings on trucking forums, described what had happened, advised other drivers to avoid that stretch of highway. Most responses were jokes or accusations of drug use. A few people took him seriously, shared their own stories of getting trapped at closed rest stops or abandoned truck stops. But nobody had solutions. Nobody understood what was causing it. Paul still drives the long-haul routes, but he's more cautious now. He checks and double-checks the locations of way stations, makes sure the facilities he's approaching are actually operational. And when he passes the location where the Mineral Well station used to be, where it still exists in whatever broken reality trapped him, Paul keeps his eyes on the road ahead and his foot steady on the accelerator. Because somewhere out there, in the space between what we can see and what actually exists, ghost officers are still checking logbooks, still waving trucks through on their eternal shifts. And Paul knows that if he slows down, if he looks too carefully at the empty lot beside I-20, he might see the lights, might see the building, might find himself pulled in for one more inspection that never ends.